So Conrad Marburg asks, I notice you don't wear weightlifting shoes when you're warming up, and then for your working sets you do wear them. This is on one of the squatting videos from a few weeks ago. So the reason for this, for me, there's two different reasons, and they're pretty simple. Then Owen's going to take you through some of the more general reasons people mightn't wear a kind of structured weightlifting shoe during their squat training. So for me, one of the main things I'm working on with my squat is being more upright. So I tend to be very posteriorly dominant. So I'm trying to train my anterior, so my quads and my anterior core more. So what I do to train that is I get my knees to track straight and to track forward over my toes. In order to get them to track more forward over my toes, I just have to increase the mobility of my ankles a small bit. And I find that warming up until around 160 kilos with no weightlifting shoes, so with no raise under my heel, allows me to warm up that motor pattern a small bit more effectively. The second thing is that I wear SBD knee sleeves. So if I warm up with a quite thick knee sleeve like that on, I find that neurologically I'm not quite primed. So because I'm getting some sort of assistance, I'm definitely getting some extra proprioceptive assistance, that my warm-up isn't as effective when I wear knee sleeves. Following on from that, in order to get knee sleeves on, I would have to take my weightlifting shoes off, and I just find it's easier to keep my weightlifting shoes off till around 160 kilos. Then I put on my sleeves, I put my shoes on after that, and then I don't have to mess around with it anymore.
So one of the reasons people might train without, and it might be a good reason to train without weightlifting shoes, or your squat shoes as some people call them, which is absolutely sacrilegious and something you should never say. But sometimes people kind of slip in, hey, it's title of sex tape. So people slip in your weightlifting shoes in which are away from your training equipment. So people think of belts. Should I wear a belt? They're should I wear wrist wraps, elbow sleeves, fucking nipple clamps? People think of all these things when it comes to training. But squat shoes kind of slip under the radar a bit in terms of training equipment. And people don't really think of it as an assistance. They think of it kind of mandatory. So while you definitely should be wearing squat shoes for most of people watching this, you should also just be aware that squat shoes, or weightlifting shoes as you should be calling them, are also part of your training equipment, and they do add assistance via mechanical assistance. So it always pays dividends to do just a little bit of training, or if you're a weightlifter, maybe even a little bit more training without your training equipment. Now, I know people like to talk about, with belts, we see what the research says, and it's okay. We like the research too, but it is good to train things that are as minimalistic as possible. Just even a small bit. We're not saying train totally without your training equipment. We're not saying never wear belts, never wear knee sleeves. Both of us used them in the past and we'll use them again in the future. We both wear squat shoes or weightlifting shoes religiously. Squat shoes is stuck in my head now. We both wear weightlifting shoes religiously, and there's great benefits to it. But just a little bit of warm-up without your equipment is always a benefit. Sometimes we talk about with your squats, you should do some of your training for periods of time. For example, if you're a powerlifter, do some of your training without knee sleeves and belts for a period of time, just for a couple of weeks. It does pay dividends in terms of getting used to it. If you're a beginner weightlifter, it pays just for the first year or so, or powerlifter or strength athlete, to not use any equipment. Squat shoes, weightlifting shoes will kind of come in there a little bit, but even for the first couple of weeks or few months, it does pay not to use those. And you can use your weightlifting shoes a little bit earlier, but again, we'd even encourage those beginners just to warm up a little bit without those. You want to get used to kind of squatting without stuff. Raw, natural squatting, raw, natty vegan squatting is what you want to be going for. Just to understand how the movement feels without assistance equipment, and then these will help you with bigger weights. So anything you can kind of do without your assistive equipment will pay dividends when you add it on. So if you can squat 200 kilos without knee sleeves, it's probably going to help you then when you put on your knee sleeves. Just as we're on the subject, I have actually one extra thing I kind of want to talk about. Some people mechanically are built quite well and might actually squat a little bit better in flat shoes. Now, I know we're just talking about warming up, and we might talk about this another time. For the weightlifters out there, you probably immediately think of someone like Toshiki Yamamoto, but there is people who do actually benefit and sometimes have better biomechanical squats when they wear flat shoes for whatever reason. Usually these are people who are built more favorably for squatting and probably would have a good squat regardless of what they're wearing. But there is certain people out there, they're a very, very small minority, but it just does pay to be aware that sometimes you do get a better feeling, and it does feel like a better squat for those people when they wear flat shoes. They're not very common, they're the minority, but it does pay to just be aware of that. You might be one of those people. Finally, last thing, we would like to invite people to our new masterclass series. So it's going to be online webinars, seminars, lectures on a variety of different subjects. Our first one is the masterclass on back squats. So we'll be going through programming, technique, and then we'll be doing a Q&A section in the lecture. So it'll be 90 minutes long. The price of the admission for the first lecture is €30. At the time of watching this, we're probably going to already be full for the first one. So numbers will be limited per lecture. If you want to register interest, however, send us an email at sikastrength@gmail.com and we will do overflow lectures to a certain extent. So we'll probably do between 2 and 3 overflow lectures per subject. After that, then we will be archiving them and putting them behind the paywall, as a lot of people have asked for that, as obviously attending a live lecture is difficult and we want people to be able to get the content. Subjects will be ranging from plyometrics for athletes, designing an off-season for rugby players, snatch techniques. So there'll be all different subjects that we usually talk about, but a little bit more in-depth. And then really part of that is we want to leave sufficient time for people to be able to interact with us. So that's why we keep the numbers smaller, so people can ask their questions and we can solve your problems. It'll benefit the other people in the group because it'll be really specific in context questions, and we'll be able to figure out how we can help those people as best as possible. So at the time of recording, there is one place left for the first masterclass in back squat, and so definitely if you're interested, email them to get them live. The benefit of being there live essentially is that we'll help you as much as possible, and then for people who can't or don't want to make the live ones, there will be a paywalled version which we'll be happy to bring to you. Finally, and just something we were always going to reiterate, if you stick around the YouTube long enough and you watch thousands of hours of us, you'll get all that information eventually. We put out everything we know essentially. There's no paywall for our information. We're not withholding it in terms of, we'll never put out that information. We might put out that information in 4 different videos over the next 6 months or whatever. So if you're like, fuck, I don't think I can afford lectures, you will have all that information eventually if you're shrewd and you're willing to watch thousands of hours of us. But if you wanted a little more niche kind of combined lecture series, and if you really want to get some help from us directly with a bit more time, check out the lecture series. Thanks guys.